Pearl writes, the scientist carves a piece from the universe and proclaims that piece in. The rest of the universe is then considered out. The choice of ins and outs creates an asymmetry in the way that we look at things, and it's this asymmetry that permits us to talk about outside intervention, and hence about causality. But look, the separation is always only an effective separation. We can always widen our view and attain a more encompassing perspective, and if we widen our view to take in the universe as a whole, it is sometimes said that there are no exogenous variables. And if there are no exogenous variables, then there are no interventions. I'm going to qualify this slightly a little bit later. But as Pearl writes in a continuation of the passage above, if you include the entire universe in the model, causality disappears because the interventions disappear. The manipular and the manipulated lose their distinction. Now, from an external perspective, outside space and time, what's sometimes referred to as a God's eye view, that's a misleading metaphor in all sorts of ways. And I'm going to speak what I mean to sort of refer to this really external view as a transcendent point of view. The variables that are treated in an experimental setting as exogenous, including the actions of human agents who manipulate them, are just parts of the pattern of correlation. We can see now why local causal information goes missing when we widen our view to include the universe as a whole. It's sometimes said that physics provides us with what I'm calling a transcendent view of the world. But that's not strictly correct. Physics retains a distinction between exogenous and endogenous variables and the distinction between laws and initial conditions. The dynamical laws will tell us what would happen under variations in initial conditions, and to that extent, they provide us with some causal information. Information about what would happen under variations in initial conditions, or indeed what would happen if the final conditions take different values. The problem is that the dynamical laws are defined only for the universe as a whole, and the causal information about local subsystems goes missing when we embed them. So causal information about local subsystems goes missing when we embed them in this sort of more encompassing model. Variables that were previously treated as exogenous and hence treated as free variables in this wider context are endogenous. And to the extent that they are constrained by the values of the new exogenous variables, we lose information about what would happen if they are allowed to vary freely. So the real problem, as I see it, the real reason that we can't derive information about the causal structure of local subsystems of the world from dynamical laws is that the counterfactuals that we need to assess and capture local causal structure are counter-legal. Given the values of newly included variables and ultimately the initial conditions of the universe, their antecedents involve violations of law. Knowing what would happen if we were to lift a variable out of the dynamical order and allow it to vary freely, that's a counter-legal counterfactual. Now, when I introduced the difference between dynamical laws and causal relations, following Russell and taking Newtonian relations as the Newtonian laws as paradigmatic, there are worries about the transferability of these conclusions to newer science, but let this go for a moment. I noted that dynamical laws provide us with differential equations relating global time slices of the world at one time to global time slices at others. They're temporally symmetric, strict, and precise. Causal relationships, by contrast, are asymmetric, imprecise, and defeasible. On the one hand, they come with long, ill-defined ceteris paribus clauses, and that makes them less reliable than the dynamical laws. On the other hand, they're local, and they're much more informative than dynamical laws. So, for example, it's not a law that a match lights when it is struck, but there's a causal relationship between the striking and the lighting of the match, and in the right setting, we can exploit that relation to get the match to light. So the practical significance of causal models, understood in this way, is pretty clear. We have a practical need for models that assess the temporally downstream effect of variation in parameters that correspond to human action, parameters over which we have direct or indirect willful control. Because that's where we live. The native epistemic position of the human agent is to possess a body of relatively detailed, specific information about the past, and to be faced with the task of putting that information to use in determination of action. Causal models are tailored for use in that context, characterized by the epistemic and practical needs of human agents. In constructing these models, we don't just assume the truth of the laws. We hold fixed frozen accidents and historical contingencies, all of the known and unknown, represented and unrepresented infrastructure that supports local, reliable connections between events in our surroundings. And we rely on that background information in our reasoning, often without knowing what it is, when we exploit a causal connection to bring about a downstream effect. In everyday contexts, when we are thinking about causes, for example, whether taking such and such a combination of drugs causes cardiac arrest, whether suntanning causes cancer, whether striking a match will cause it to light. We're not looking for exceptionless regularities that hold across any situation under any conditions. We're looking for robust, feasible, counterfactual supporting regularities that obtain more or less in our surroundings, or surroundings like these, where like these is very often left unspecified. So causal generalizations can't be derived from the global dynamical laws of physics because they draw the lines between fixed and variable structure in a different place. They allow less to vary than physics in one sense, and they allow more to vary in physics than physics in another. So right now this is just trying to diagnose exactly what the difference between causal models is and the global dynamical models of physics. They allow less to vary than physics in that they hold fixed environmental infrastructure that physics regards as contingent. And they allow more to vary than physics because they allow free variation of variables that physics regards as constrained by the values of antecedent variables. This latter fact explains why we can't reconstruct causal models by simply making explicit the matters of fact that support causal relations, exposing the scaffolding, so to speak. It's because causal models have counterfactual implications that outrun those of globally defined dynamical laws. The basic problem is that the more that gets included in your model, the less that is allowed to vary. One way of putting this is that as our models tell us more about actuality, they tell us less about counterfactuality. And the counterfactual information is important, is practically important. There are different reactions that one might have to the situation, or to this diagnosis for the situation. The first is just to reject the extramodal content that one gets from local causal models. Simply deny that there really are facts about what would happen under hypothetical interventions. Now the problem with that is that, and I think this is what was implicit in Cartwright's objection to Russell, the local causal information is indispensable to decision. When I'm deciding how to act, I need to know the downstream effects of the alternatives, even though only one of these will be actualized. I need to know what would happen if I acted under any of the ways that I see as available to me. The second reaction is to assume that that there's a genuine loss of information here. I see no reason not to think this. Science is about studying the modal structure of the world at the local and global level. It's about providing us with the models that we need to guide our interactions with it. And those interactions take place on the local level. In a way, the counterfactual information that the global models give us is degenerate. It's not information that we could use to affect anything.